race or class. The Space Marines carrying little boxes with bones in them. That's referring to the real veneration in medieval Christianity of reliquaries, where the bones or otherwise the body parts of saints, holy people, or even the Virgin Mary and Jesus himself are placed in some incredibly ornate vessel and venerated. Venerations of body parts and blood and things is very much part of traditional Christianity. There was an industry of creating these things in the Middle Ages. Everybody has 10 fingers. Not St. James or St. George seems to have had hundreds of fingers, judging by the number of reliquaries that claim to have his finger in them. They've got the Roman stuff, and then they're piling in a lot of Christian belief and mysticism. Not all Christians believe it. This is Roman Catholicism and a very particular part of it. This is what the Reformation is all about. People decided they didn't believe all of that anymore. Maybe the Space Marines have forgotten that much. In my talks and lectures and things, I deal a lot with a traditional weapons identity, something like a sword. Its identity as a utilitarian object and as an expressive work of art simultaneously. You have to think about them both. It's a weapon cutting your enemies apart, but it's also a symbol of God's power. And gilded and engraved and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Pre-industrial handmade weapons. It becomes much harder to do both of those things when it's patently mechanical, when it's obviously something made in a factory with machines and modern technology. Because that technological industrial aspect tends to kind of cancel out the mystical or aesthetic or artistic power of something. There are examples of like submachine guns being gold-plated in ivory grips and engraved, given as diplomatic gifts and things like that. But it's usually quite a problematic thing to deal with. And with the weapons design in 40K, they are really wrestling. They want to find a way of having those high-tech motorized weapons at the same time as they have this more primitive traditional quality. And it's really interesting when you try and play with that. You're advanced technologically, but also in a society that's working in a very traditional, tribal sort of way almost. There's inherent contradictions there because a tribal society is not big enough to allow for the kind of social specialization that industrial and advanced technology requires. So there's generally advancement that the society has to make from a small group to a much larger group. It's kind of hard for me sometimes to believe in a very advanced technological society that's also quite primitive and tribal. Night lords. I have a strange feeling. I thought the Doglar wings and the helmet is just a little too much. Getting to know them a little more, I sort of have a weird fondness for them.
If we're comparing Space Marines to Knights, the Assault Marines almost feel like they're their own cavalry.
They drop right in where they're needed. That's the trick to using any of these classes of armored soldiers, whatever you want to call them. They all have some very distinct strengths, but they have to be used right. And the medieval historical scholarship has kind of overemphasized or over-egged those points in history when armored knights on their horses have been overturned and defeated. Because in the modern mind, obsessed with class and class war, we like any story which shows the powerful, overmighty aristocracy being overthrown by common people. But they're like any weapon. If you use them right, use heavy cavalry correctly, they're devastating. It's always the same in 40K. You've got a lot of different specializations. You don't use them right, they will get killed.
This is the Vanguard class, who's more lightly armored. to have a grapple
Yep.
to be able to drive himself towards high-value targets.
Yeah, I mean, they're analogous to light cavalry, light or medium cavalry in the 16th century, or light infantry. Again, it's the balance between speed and mobility and range versus punching power and the ability to take punishment. You can't have everything. It's all inversely proportional. And the classes that you see at 40K all have their equivalents in reality, certainly in evil reality. It doesn't look totally unlike the standard U.S. military combat knife, the so-called K-bar. There we see a pattern blade. There's a couple of different ways historically you achieve those patterns. It's either pattern welding, where you have different metals that are braided and forged together, and that's what creates the pattern that you know what you're doing. Or there's the use of homogeneous crucible steel that can be forged to form these patterns if you then etch it with the light acid. Two completely different techniques that are often mistaken and confused with each other. I'm not so sure whether the Space Marines are pattern welding or use crucible steel here, but it's cool. I mean, it's very useful for something like this because a pattern, it's an immediate